Hello everyone, welcome to the discussion on Geography Mains question paper 2022. Questions this year were general on a relatively easier side. Few questions were challenging, but most of the questions I feel were within the range of any candidate who has studied it properly. We'll have a discussion on what type of questions have been asked and what kind of questions, what kind of answers do we expect you to write in such answers. And all those who have taken mains this year, I wish them good luck, right? And those who are preparing, who will be taking mains this next year, this is just an idea that the kind of questions that are asked and how should you be writing this or taking this exam. Let's see. This year, if you see the total marks in General Studies Geography, it has been 115. Last year it was 110. Prior to that, the number of marks would have been were lesser. This year it has been slightly on a higher side. So it's good for geography option students, but otherwise the questions were not that tough that GS people who do not have geography optional from General Studies point of view also, it wasn't that difficult. So the first question that was asked was describe the characteristics and type of primary rocks. Now see, this question is in geomorphology, and the kind of questions that were asked in geomorphology in the previous years were relatively on a tougher side, and this year it has been relatively easy. The question is very basic. Describe the characteristic and types of primary rocks. So first we'll discuss what kind of information should we have to take this answer. So first is about primary rocks. As we know, among all the rocks, all the three rocks, igneous, metamorphic and sedimentary rock, primary rock, igneous rock is called as a primary rock, because the magma that comes to the surface is the primary source of mineral, and the solidification of that magma leads to the development of such rocks, that is igneous rocks. So what type of minerals are found and what are different types of igneous rocks? Let's try to understand them. See, the magma that comes towards the surface, that tends to rise toward the surface, contains so many minerals, predominantly silica, iron, magnesium, also other minerals like calcium, phosphate, carbon, sulfur, etc. They are also present there in these rocks, but predominantly they are of silicates. Now, based on the presence of silica and the solidification, if you see the category of these rocks or magma solidification, some of the rocks which contain very little amount of silica and have a higher content of magnesium and iron are called as ultramafic rocks. Very little silica but more of magnesium and iron. Then mafic rocks, silica content is slightly higher. Here the silica content is slightly higher than ultramafic. The silica content further increases. These are called as intermediate. You can call it as intermediate mafic rocks. Mafic here primarily stands for magnesium and ferrous, that is iron. The silica content further increases, it's high. These are called as felsic rocks, having a higher content of silica. Now, the solidification of such rocks, that is ultramafic and mafic rocks, takes place at a higher temperature also. So these solidify at a higher temperature, whereas felsic rocks solidify at lower temperature. They take longer time to solidify, they solidify at a lesser temperature. Now, when the magma comes to the surface, mafic and ultramafic rocks, mafic rocks solidify within the deeper layers of earth. It's not that the mafic rock do not reach to the surface, they do, but the quantities are relatively lesser. Whereas these rocks, such as called as intermediate rocks, that is rocks containing intermediate quantities of silica, that is somewhere around 50 to 60% of silica, they solidify relatively at a lesser temperature, and further at less temperature felsic rocks solidify. Right? Intermediate mafic rocks include basalt, felsic rocks include andesite, andesitic and granitic, which solidify at the surface because they solidify actually at a lower temperature than the mafic rocks. Now, by this you should understand there must be some rocks which are there within the surface, which solidify within the surface, and some rocks which manage to come to the surface and then solidify at the surface. Now, this makes us to understand, and we classify igneous rocks in two categories. One is called as intrusive rocks, another called as extrusive rocks, rocks which manage to come to the surface, that is extrusive rocks. Extrusive rocks can be felsic, they can be basaltic, rocks. Whereas intrusive rocks predominantly, we are using predominantly are mafic and ultramafic, that is they have a higher content of magnesium and iron, the metallic content is relatively higher. Now, when we study for different types of rocks and volcanic eruptions or intrusive volcanic rocks, you will find that we study different types of intrusive rocks such as batholith, right? We study sill, dikes, pacholith, etc. So, the word limit is not allowing us to describe everything. We can conclude that in few lines that they are intrusive rocks which solidify within the surface of earth and within the crust, and then they do not reach to the surface, and they include mainly batholiths, laccoliths, dikes, sills, etc. So far as extrusive rocks are concerned, this is the characteristic feature of these two rocks, that one is having higher content of silica, that is andesitic or granitic, or they have lesser content of silica, slightly higher content of magnesium and ferrous. Lesser than felsic, higher than mafic. Understood that? That's intermediate. These are basaltic rocks. Now, one more point that should be clear here is some of these rocks, some of these igneous rocks are crystalline in shape. They are in crystal forms and some of them grains. Now, whether a rock will be crystalline, it has a crystal or it has more grain, is dependent upon the cooling process. Now, suppose the lava eruption takes place and the lava is surrounded by a water body. So, it gets into the water body and then solidifies very abruptly, very rapidly. So, if the cooling process is faster, it gives rise to the formation of grains, because like if you see the cooling process, it gets faster. So, there will be multiple granular formation taking place in the solidification process. Whereas in the crystallization, if it is slower, if the cooling process or solidification process is slower, it gives rise to the formation of layers, solidified layers, and then can lead to more of crystal formation if the solidification process is slower. This is a basic idea about what is an igneous rock. This is a basic idea about what is a primary rock. Now, we should also understand why do we call them as primary. is because other rocks are derived from the igneous rocks by the process of erosion, sedimentation and metamorphism. Right? This is the one part of the question that we need to write. And lastly, then the next aspect that was asked is characteristics of igneous rocks, which is quite factual. See, whenever characteristic is asked, it's more a factual question. We can write in points what are different types of characteristics that is possessed by igneous rocks, so we can manage with that. Now, this is kind of information that we need to write. Other than the characteristic, what should be there in the first 3-4 lines of your answer? Because it's implicit that it's an introduction. So, what should be there in the first 2-3 lines? See, we also need to define what is rock, isn't it? That's why how we define that all the process. Rock is a compact form of minerals, It's an aggregate of minerals, we all know. Then we'll must write such a line so that we define the rock in one go, that rock is a compact form of minerals. Magma reaching to the surface is the source of such minerals. So, we are writing the definition of rock. At the same time, we also need to write why is igneous rock considered as a primary rock, right? So, we are writing here that magma reaching the surface is a source of such minerals. Other rocks that is sedimentary, metamorphic, are derivatives of igneous rocks or igneous rocks by the process of sedimentation, that is erosion and sedimentation, and metamorphism. This is the first point that we can write in our answers, so that it is clear why is it called as primary rock and what is basically a primary rock. Then we need to write next point about the types of primary rocks, that is, you can write that magmatic differentiation, although it's a complex process, we can use this word magmatic differentiation, otherwise we can simply write the solidification of magma at different layers of earth gives rise to the formation of a variety of rocks, right? So, gives rise to formation of variety of rocks containing lesser silica and more of metals called as ultramafic and mafic solidify in the deeper layers of crust, right? By this we are actually writing these are called as intrusive rocks. So, we are categorizing it as an intrusive rocks. In the next point, in the next line, we will write about magma with higher silica solidifies at lower temperature, therefore manages to reach to the surface. They form mainly extrusive rocks. Here you can provide the example of intrusive rocks, right, such as dikes, sills, etc., and extrusive rocks. They are also called as calcic and basaltic. Now here, when we are writing basaltic, you should write what is a basaltic rock and what is a felsic rock. That is either andesitic or granitic rock with a higher content of silica. This is how we mention about the first aspect. And we can synthesize a sentence in such a way that less sentences, less words, we should be able to explain more and more. Then the second part of the question is quite easy. I would consider that as an easy aspect, that is characteristics of such rocks. So first, one of the characteristic is that we have already discussed, that igneous rocks or primary rocks develop grains if, must write about the solidification process. Solidification is rapid. If it is slower, they are crystallized. These are crystalline. If the solidification process is slower, then you can add to that. Contains no fossil. No fossils, because the temperature is so high that everything burns away, so there is no chance of fossil formation whatsoever. So no fossils in the igneous rocks. Then we will also be writing that these are source of minerals, rich minerals in fact, right, from metallic minerals to minerals such as quartz, the present. And once you enumerate, I am not writing all the characteristics, but you can understand that it's the easy part. Once we have written the characteristics of these rocks, towards a conclusion, see, we always suggest that conclusion should be something more applied, something more, what is more important for the society and how is it done. For that purpose, you can write about that the igneous rock formed the seedling or the basis, you can say, of continental accretion. Continental accretion. What do we understand by continental accretion? It means the formation of continent must have taken place when the magma reaches the surface. So the cratonic formation, that continental formation, must have taken place with the same process. It would have helped in the evolution of Earth's crust. Besides, they are rich in minerals. So from metallic minerals, which we have already mentioned in the characteristics, and also lead to the formation of fertile soil. So something like that we can write in our conclusion to synthesize this answer. But on the difficulty level, quite easy, not very difficult. You should know about the rocks and you can take this question easily. Coming to the next aspect of the question, the question demands, discuss the main meaning of color-coded weather warnings for cyclone prone areas given by Indian Meteorological Department. Now for this, it's an relatively easy if you are clear with the bit of about current affairs and you have been following newspapers, you have been following the warnings, weather warnings that has been given by, that is being continuously being given by Indian Meteorological Department and so on. There are some color specifications. The reason why color specification is given, so that we can send an alert, we can send and connect to the people. After all, it is people participation that will help us to mitigate the effect or reduce the effect of disaster. So cyclone is one of the disasters that keep taking place in the coastal areas of India, especially Odisha, Andhra Pradesh. Last year we also had few cyclones in Arabian Sea. And if you check the previous year question papers, the question on cyclone has been quite frequently being asked. So you should be following that anyways for the future examinations also. Now here there are mainly 4 color coding that is provided by IMD. One is green, yellow, orange and red. The green color shows no particular awareness required. That means if there's a cyclonic formation, it will take at least 72 hours to make the landfall. Then for yellow, the cyclone is approaching but still far away. It will still take about 48 hours to reach. Orange is potentially dangerous and an unusual phenomena. Unusual phenomena means a cyclone has approached, the low pressure of the cyclone intensifies. There are a lot of, the wind movement is taking place towards that low pressure zone, rainfall is intense, and the red alert, that is level 4, is particularly dangerous. That is, it has made a landfall. Landfall means when cyclone hits the coast and we need to take the rescue operations and we need to evacuate people as immediately as possible. All these are warnings as per the impact of the cyclone. How impactful is a cyclone in a given region, and how we can manage with the disaster aspect, or how can we evacuate the people, and more importantly to send an alert to people who are going to be affected by cyclonic disturbances. So these color codings are mentioned. To take this answer, see one point that we should require, right? I mean, one of the information that all of us should have is these colors. We should be very clear with that. What does green mean? What is meant by yellow? What is meant by orange? And what is meant by the red color? I've seen red, everyone knows, green, everyone knows, but there is at times the difference between, like the confusion between the yellow and the orange aspect. So what does orange signify and what does yellow signify, that you should be clear about. Now to understand this, to take this answer, first is you should also reflect, why is it needed? Why color coding is needed? No doubt we'll write that cyclones are one of the climatic disasters that reoccur or that occur quite frequently, mainly along the eastern coast of India, full stop. Then we'll also write that why color coding is needed. It is mainly to send the alert, to send the warning systems, so that our rescue team, National Disaster Rescue Force, that gets active, and we can send the rescue teams as soon as possible in a place where it needs to be sent. So this question is all dependent upon how well do you know about these color codings. So nothing much to discuss as such other than these colors. The next question is, discuss the natural resource potential of Deccan Trap. See, all of us know about Deccan Trap. It's not a new question that we have got this in this exam. There have been questions asked in the past related to Regur soil, related to Deccan origin and all that. To understand this trap, let's briefly understand what information do we have about this Deccan Trap. The word trap actually comes from the word trappen, which is a Swedish term for steps, stairs rather. We know that it's a basaltic flow, it's a lava, basic lava, and basic lava actually accumulates in the form of steps, in the form of stairs, one layer, second layer, third layer, fourth layer. So layer by layer accumulation happens. So due to such formations, it's called as a trap. So if you understand what is trap, if you understand how this formation has taken place, you should understand also that it is a basic lava or has a higher basaltic flow. Another point that we should know is that it started accumulating in the Cretaceous period. And Cretaceous period, when Indian plate encountered a hot spot activity near in the Indian Ocean, one such hot spot activity is still there in southern part of Indian Ocean, that's called as Reunion hot spot. Now these are related to the Deccan formation, right? So basaltic lava in the Cretaceous period, an outpouring from the reunion hotspot that is located in the Indian Ocean region. This is the formation aspect. Second is the locational aspect of Deccan Trap. A lot of times people ask this question, should we be drawing maps in the exam GS paper or not? Of course, if the question demands, you must draw maps. I won't suggest that you unnecessarily put map in every answer or every geography answer that you write, but at least those where it is needed, you should. So we should know where is Deccan Trap, and for that we can also draw small map in your answers just to show wherever it is the location of Deccan Trap. Like suppose the location of Deccan Trap here in the western part of southwestern part of India, including Kathiawad region of Gujarat, Maharashtra, northern Karnataka. It also spreads to the Malwa region, also spreads a bit towards a part of Telangana region. Now this is a huge volcanic plateau. The question is mainly about the resources. Right? This is the information that we read for our examinations. Right? In the physiography of India, the location of Deccan Plateau, formation of Deccan Plateau or Deccan Trap. Now the examiner is not concerned about the location. The question doesn't demand about the location. The question also doesn't demand about the origin. The question is about the resource potential. That means the resources that are present in the Deccan region and resources that can be trapped or explode in the Deccan Plateau region. So think about it. Anyone who has studied about Deccan Plateau, in fact everyone studies about Deccan Plateau, so we should know that it is also called as Ragur soil. Ragur soil or black soil. If it's, let's connect, if it's volcanic in origin, it must be very fertile, right? So one of the biggest natural resource that we have is land, is a fertile land, because then we can practice agriculture over it. So land quality is also a resource, right? So first is presence of black soil, that's quite fertile soil, and therefore it plays a very significant role in the production of cotton, also called as cotton soil for the same reason. Then next aspect that we can think about it, will there be fossil fuels or will there be coal or petroleum and others? Very minimal. The reason why, it's igneous, so igneous rocks do not have any fossil fuels or any fossil formations. So on the account of the fossil fuels, it is relatively less. But in the Vardha region, Vardha Godavari region, there is coal formation. Not related to Deccan as such. Deccan formation, it happened after the formation of Deccan Plateau. Then we do find some metallic minerals also, metallic minerals in Ratnagiri district, western Maharashtra. We also find some metallic minerals in the Malanad region of Karnataka. Karnataka Plateau. See, Malanad is a hilly region, uplifted region of northern Karnataka. The second part of Karnataka region is called as Maidan, which is low lying, that's more agricultural. The northern part, that is Malanad region, is known for the minerals like especially the iron and also for the coffee production. Then, in some areas of Deccan Plateau, there is a rich resource of water availability, that is water, because percolation of water does happen in black soil region. The percolation of water is not seen in other parts of peninsular India because of the metamorphic rocks. But in some regions of Deccan Plateau, we'll find that aquifers are there because it is volcanic in origin. Grains are very fine grained, so the percolation of water does happen, and that has led to the formation of some aquifers. So it is also potential water resource in the region, right? So it has potential water resource, but not every part of Deccan Plateau, not in the rain shadow area of Deccan Plateau, not so much there, but mainly on the part of Deccan Plateau where we have more of this rainfall. Then besides that, the region also has a combined effect of solar and wind energy. Like, where do we have solar energy? Possibility in the rain shadow areas. In the rain shadow areas of Western Ghats, that becomes a part of Deccan Plateau. That's a part of Deccan Plateau where solar panels can be installed and solar energy generation can take place. We also have a possibility of wind energy because the region also has Western Ghats. It lies to the eastern part of the Western Ghats where the mountain breeze, or rather valley breeze, can play an important role in wind energy. But yes, the potential of wind energy in the region is relatively less in comparison to coastal areas and other regions of Deccan, in other regions of India. Here, but a good source of solar energy in the rain shadow areas because they have less number of rainy days and more of the solar days. So that is where we can relate, find out resource potential of Deccan Plateau. Now it is relatively tough to actually find out the resources of this region, because if the question was on Chota Nagpur, if the question was on some other particular topic, then or region, then the resource formation and accumulation was easy to write. Here it's largely agricultural, so formation or rather synthesis of answer will be relatively tough to think about, but these are still we can think about it. To understand what is Deccan Plateau, how Deccan Plateau formation has taken place, we can still manage with this question, right? Let's move on to the next topic. So examine the potential of wind energy in India and explain reasons for their limited spatial spread. So potential of wind energy in India, easier part. Then the second part of the question is explain the reasons for their limited spatial spread. Limited spatial spread. Why wind energy is not generated in larger part of India and so on. So first of all, we know that wind energy is significant for India, right? It's so important, wind energy, considering the fact that India targets to become zero emission by 2070, and also the other commitments that India has made on the world forums. Wind energy can be one of the source for one of the ways to reduce the carbon dioxide emission, right? Let's see first of all the potential of wind energy in India. See, India has a huge coastline, like 7516 kilometers, or broadly 7600 kilometers of coastline, and this provides us a huge potential which India can generate potential of about 127 gigawatts, right? Whereas the gross potential is nearly 302 gigawatts, right? That is a gross potential. Gross potential of around 302 gigawatts. But now, so far as the exact generation is concerned, the wind energy generation is concerned, it is 40 gigawatts of energy generation. Wind energy generation, 40 gigawatts. So see how much is the potential and how much are we generating. It's far less than what is the potential and what is the achieved production. Now to bridge that gap, we need to focus more on the wind energy generation. To fulfill that gap, we have to install technology and bring up more wind energy, that is there. But the question demands only about the potential of wind energy in India. Now, according to the institutes, that is Wind Energy Institute, National Wind Energy Institute, it says that 95% of this potential, 95% of potential is in 7 coastal states. Not all of them, 7 states. Like Gujarat has, Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, lesser in Odisha, lesser in Kerala, lesser in West Bengal. There are particular reasons for that, we'll see those. So 90% of them are in potential, are in 7 states. Now, this is the first part of our answer, that what is the wind energy potential of India? That is about 127 gigawatts. If you remember that value, it's okay. If you don't remember, it's fine. But we should know that what is the total amount of energy generation from the wind, and that comes to around 40 gigawatts of energy generation. Then we will also be writing this point that 95% of this total energy generation is among the 7 states. Now this raises a question mark, and that is again the second part of the question. Explain the reasons for their limited spatial spread. Why is that limited spatial spread? See, wind energy requires a higher speed of wind. And if we come towards the interior parts of the continents, mountains, valleys, construction sites, vegetation, they reduce the speed of the wind by producing more friction, and therefore the potential decreases. Therefore, wind energy cannot be produced in every part of the continent. So therefore, first point of that we can think is that friction is higher in interior parts of continents, right? Interior parts of continents. So it's mainly located in coastal areas. Why? We know that when wind blows over the ocean body, ocean surface, it decreases the friction. The friction is less, the impact and the speed of the wind is higher. So it's more suitable for coastal areas. This is first point that we can write. Besides that, it is also possible in areas of Rajasthan, Gujarat, especially Run of Kutch, and in some areas of North Indian plains. The reason why in these parts of this country, especially Run of Kutch region, Rajasthan region, and some parts of northern plains, the frictional drag or vegetation level, vegetation cover is minimal, is less. So frictional drag is less, so speed is higher. But at the same time, it cannot be in every part of northern plains because it may affect our agricultural production, because we know that they are granaries of India. So we will also be writing here in the northern plains that except fertile regions of north plains. So most parts of the northern plains are fertile. In some patches where the fertility is less, we can install these the windmills. so that doesn't have much influence. Now, the reason why it also has a limited impact is because, right, there is an effect on biodiversity, especially birds, right. That is also not feasible for birds because the movement of birds get affected by windmills, right. The population of bird decreases in the regions where windmills are installed. So it is not an appropriate idea to install these windmills everywhere. Then you would also find we have not mentioned much about the Odisha, although it is also coastal, but some areas, cyclones and storms, they affect wind energy generation, windmills, right. In cyclone affected coastlines like Odisha, the windmills can be affected by that, right. So therefore the production is relatively less in these states, so they do not show the higher potential. So let's go back to the question again. It demands potential of wind energy, so we'll write about wind energy per production. It's very high, estimated to be fourth largest in the world. Then so limited spatial spread, these are some of the points for the limited spatial spread. Also understand one point, this is true for all the renewable sources of energy, whether it's solar, it's about the wind, it's about any other renewable source of energy like tidal energy as well. What we find in these aspects is that the transmission is difficult. Transmission is difficult because of the losses, the transmission losses that occurred in renewable source of energy. So you will find that there is a very limited spread, a very limited spread of wind energy or any renewable source of energy. They are more localized regions, and they are more localized in a particular place. So the reason why we have relatively less wind energy. But towards the conclusion, you must mention some of the programs like offshore wind policy, offshore wind energy policy of 2015, also kind of solar wind hybrid that can be very well executed in the areas of Rajasthan and Run of Kutch region, right, where a combined energy generation of wind and solar can be done. And also we will mention that India's commitment of zero emission by 2070 can be fulfilled only if we focus on the wind energy. We are already focusing on solar, we are focusing on other renewable source of energy. Now wind energy can also be very useful for the production of or to achieve this target of zero emission. This would be the conclusion towards it. And in the first paragraph itself, you should write about what is wind energy, right. You should mention about what is wind energy and how wind energy can be useful for an energy deficit country like India, because India has a limited resource of petroleum and now also coal, not limited, but then yes, India is not deficit, but then it is limited, of course. So in a developing country like India, where energy is deficit, renewable source of energy can provide a very easy and a cheaper alternative. Wind energy with a coastline, then we can write about with a coastline of around 7,600 kilometers, it offers a huge scope of wind energy in India. Stop. Then estimated potential of India is about 127 gigawatts, right? And then we will go to the next point and write what is the total energy generation of India, and from there we can write about why is it limited in India. Right, so I hope you can frame your answer and think about it. So the beginning of this answer, right, the intro of this answer should be getting these keywords about developing country, resource deficit, like energy resource deficit, and a renewable source of energy, sources of energy can provide an option. Let's start with this, write about this other points, that what is the potential and all, and then towards a conclusion, bringing it to the current aspect of what is India's commitment and the policy, national offshore wind policy. Then we have a question that is repeated in a lot of UPSC exams, and in every class, every batch, I keep telling them, I keep telling everyone that you should be very clear with ocean currents, because you take any UPSC exam, we expect the questions from ocean currents in the prelims examination, in the mains examination. Here is another example. I mean, if you check previous year question papers, there have been questions on ocean currents. What are the forces that influence ocean currents? The question is about forces. The question is about forces that influence ocean currents. Describe their role in fishing industries of the world. See, it's a very, very easy question. Nothing very difficult. Just one point that everyone should think about. The question demands about forces. Forces responsible for influencing ocean currents. It is not about factors influencing ocean currents. That is where some people may overthink or may not think about this, and there is a tendency that we may overwrite. Forces responsible or which influence ocean currents. So what is the first force that influences the ocean currents? Is the frictional force. Frictional force produced between winds and the surface of water or oceans. That's the first force, and it's quite easy to understand and elaborate, because when we discuss ocean currents at equator, right, there are winds which are prevalent. The prevalent winds include northeast trade winds and southeast trade winds. Because of northeast and southeast trade winds, water movement occurs in the similar direction. So we write this and take an example. For example, trade winds carry water from east to west at equator. Similarly, there are other winds as well, like at this part of the globe, the westerlies moving from west to east, so responsible for carrying ocean currents from west to east. So there are some drifts, which is North Atlantic drift, South Atlantic, West wind drift, North Pacific drift. These drifts are carried by westerlies. So it is the frictional force produced between the water surface and the wind movement. So this is suppose a tub of water which contains water, and the wind movement or wind blows over the surface. Because of the wind, the frictional force or frictional drag produced on the surface of water will be carried in the same direction. So ocean current will also be carried in the same direction. This also happens in the subpolar areas. It happens in the equatorial areas. In fact, we'll provide one more example, and that will be more appropriate. That is northeast and southwest monsoon drift in Indian Ocean is because of southwest and northeast monsoon. The better example that we can quote. So the first force is frictional force. The second force that acts here is the Coriolis force. Coriolis force. So we will write, by the virtue of rotation of Earth, pseudo force is applied, that's called as Coriolis force is applied on a moving object. It can be an ocean current, it can be a wind, it can be anything that deflects the current or deflects the object towards right of its direction in northern hemisphere and to the left of its direction in southern hemisphere. That's easy. All of us know about Coriolis force. And of course, if you're taking mains, you must have studied about Coriolis force. So what happens here, in the northern hemisphere, some gyrations are formed under the influence of Coriolis force, like along the Sargasso Sea. We can take an example, Sargasso Sea. In southern hemisphere, some gyrations are formed because of towards left of its direction, like what we see in the southern Atlantic or southern Pacific also. Right? These are examples. Third force is the gradient force, right, which is very, very essential. Gradient force. Now, what type of gradient is produced here? It is thermal gradient or temperature difference, produced by temperature difference and the salinity difference. Salinity difference. Now, what is temperature difference? How does it act? We will write about it, that it is warm water gets carried towards cold water zones of polar areas. The reason for that, cold water, we'll write that it creates a difference in the water level. Cold water is denser, subsides, whereas warm water maintains a higher level, it expands. So from equator, water moves towards polar areas. So we'll write, for example, Gulf Stream or Kuroshio current moves towards polar areas because there's an expansion of warm water towards colder areas or colder conditions, that is polar areas. This is one point. Second, as per the salinity difference, we'll write that water movement takes place from lower salinity, to higher salinity. That is why from the polar latitudes, water movement happens towards lower latitudes. So the polar current or ocean movements, currents from poles move towards lower latitudes. You can take an example. For example, Labrador current. For example, Oyashio current. Should write about it. Right? Fourth force that is important is the force of gravity or gravitational force. Gravitational force. Now see, to explain the gravitational force on the movement of currents or winds or anything, it's quite difficult. Because how will gravitational force affect the movement of currents? It's difficult to relate actually, but you cannot deny this force. We cannot deny this force. We have to mention this force because you will write every particle on the surface of earth experiences the force of gravity. Isn't it? Force of gravity. Every particle experiences the force of gravity. So do ocean movements. With every movement, the force of gravity is required because water on the surface of earth, gravitational force plays a significant role. Movements of water indirectly therefore are affected by the gravitational force. Should write about this gravitational force as well. Then see, now comes the other aspects such as shape of continents, coastlines, etc. We'll just summarize one more thing is OBR, ocean bottom relief. Ocean bottom relief again produces friction, therefore decreases the speed of currents. So in shallower water of ocean or shallower part of the ocean, the speed is less. And that's how it gets affected by. So frictional force produced between wind and ocean current will produce the movement. Frictional force between ocean bottom relief and the ocean current will reduce the movement. We will not write shape of the continent because it will not be major force or any force that affects the ocean of oceanic movement or current movement. It will be the frictional drag, right? We may exclude gravitational force because a lot of us do not consider that as a significant force because it is not explained or something, but you should write about force of gravity. Then comes the next part of the question is about its role in fishing industry. So we should write that one of the richest fishing nations or one of the richest fishing zones are eastern part of Canada, that is Newfoundland. That is because of mixing of cold and warm currents. Now this normalizes temperature, and with the normalization of temperature that induces growth of planktons, which further increases the growth of fishes as they act as feeding ground. So for fishes, these are feeding grounds where mixing of ocean currents can take place. Newfoundland. There is another aspect of North Sea called as Dodgers Bank, where North Atlantic drift normalizes temperature of North Sea and therefore induces the growth of fishes. Then third is upwelling of cold nutrition or nutritious water along eastern margin of oceans. Example, Peru. So when ocean currents move from east to west, there is an upwelling of water. So you can show it here in a diagram maybe that currents move from east to west. Here because of higher salinity, density increases, it produces a kind of those internal circulation, those thermohaline circulations. On the other side, cold water upwells. Cold water upwelling. Which part of ocean is this? Eastern part of ocean. And this brings neutrons to the surface. Example is Peru. So long answer, but we need to summarize that. The first point of this answer should be the definition of ocean current. Right? We have to mention about what is an ocean current. So, long distance, some keywords for ocean currents: long distance water movements, right, in a fairly constant direction, fairly constant direction is how we define ocean currents. So, you can draw a diagram like this where you can show the movement of ocean currents in a general note. Then you can write about forces which are affecting ocean currents towards the end, fishing industries and fishing regions, right. One more point that you can add to your conclusion. We'll go to this last point, that is, due to climate change, ocean current pattern or pattern of ocean current is changing, like increased temperature and intensity of El Nino that destroyed the fishing grounds, So, climate change is also affecting pattern or movement of ocean currents. That is how you can write, and it's a very long answer, but still we'll have to manage and write all these points in our answers to get good marks, because that's an easy question. Then comes describe the distribution of rubber producing countries. Indicate the major environmental issues faced by them. Which are rubber producing countries of the world? So, when we think about the rubber producing countries of the world, it is Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, India, Brazil. These are major rubber producing countries of the world. This for distribution will, because its geographical aspect is located, like is mentioned here, distribution of ocean currents, beg your pardon, distribution of rubber producing countries. So, we should think about geographical conditions of rubber producing countries. Geographical conditions such as rainfall. Rubber requires higher rainfall, preferably more than 200 centimeters in a year. It also requires higher temperature, definitely more than 20 degrees Celsius. So, it is clear that it should be in hot and humid regions. Third point you can add on your own, that is that if it's more like hot and humid condition where rainfall is very high and the temperature is also very high, then in that case the soils will be mainly lateritic with a pH slightly towards the acidic side, right. So, soils required here is lateritic soils. These are three geographical conditions significant for rubber production. Number one, rainfall should be high, temperature needs to be higher, soil should be lateritic. All these three conditions are fulfilled in Southeast Asia. Being located on an eastern margin of continents, Southeast Asia receives higher rainfall. Then coastal areas of India, northeastern region of India, of India, eastern and or Amazon region in South America. These are better regions for rubber cultivation, rubber plantation rather. So the distribution. So what is the distribution? Here, a little bit about the climatic regions, mainly found in equatorial climate, right? Tropical areas along the coastal regions, also in monsoonal region. By this, you can see, we don't suggest that you draw a world map to show all the distribution, all the countries of the, rubber producing countries of the world. I would rather suggest put the geographical conditions, right, a general distribution. They are located in the equatorial areas, monsoonal regions, tropical areas, in coastal areas where the rainfall is very heavy. Those are areas where rubber production takes place, and these are distribution of rubber producing countries. Now, environmental aspect related to rubber plantation or faced by these countries. We should understand that it is not a natural vegetation, right? Rubber plantation is artificially done, and it has been the reason for the removal of forest. Especially it has affected Amazon, it has affected northeastern part of India, it has affected the tribes in Indonesia and Malaysia. This is the removal of forest. Second, the monoculture, single crop is grown on a larger area, plantation, no other crop is cultivated along with the rubber. So monoculture is dangerous for soils because it reduces the fertility of soil, dangerous for soil, making it deficit or deficient in nutrients. Right? Coming to the third aspect, right, this has also led to a lot of other issues like decrease in biodiversity. And rubber industries overall, they lead to the release of sulfur, release of ammonia, release of other harmful gases, and therefore degradation is on a large scale. And if you look at this entire structure, the rubber plantations also lack biomass. Right? Lacks biomass. So that further increases the soil erosion and decreases the soil fertility. And this is about rubber plantation and rubber producing regions of the world. Right. So here you can always associate rubber plantation and rubber aspect, right, in the sense that when we refer to the rubber plantation, and it is good for industries, but at least the environmental balance needs to be maintained. Biodiversity needs to be maintained, because not only it affects biodiversity, but also somewhere rehabilitation of population needs to be done, because it displaces a huge tribal wealth. Right? This is the aspect. Next. So mention the significance of strait and isthmus in international trade. Now again, we should know what is straits, what is isthmus, very basic definition of straits and isthmus, and then it becomes little challenging, because when it comes to the international trade, straits, we know those narrow water bodies, right? Narrow water bodies which connect two large water bodies. large water bodies. Whereas isthmus, it is narrow piece of land that connects large land masses. That's a basic idea about isthmus and straits. So first we need to define what is isthmus and then straits. This is a basic point that we can relate. Now, some of the straits have been the great passages. Straits have acted as passages for ships. So then we'll come to the isthmus. And it is said that who controls or whoever controls straits is most likely to control the sea or the trade route. Now, it is not that controls the route or the sea or ocean, but then most likely to control. So having a control over strait is very important because it is a gateway, it is a passage and connects two larger water bodies. Now, since the time of globalization, the trade between east and west has significantly increased, and water being the cheapest mode of transport is more preferred over the land route and air routes. So we'll write this point that in a globalized world, or since globalization, the trade between east and west increased, right? And sea being more preferred, being the cheapest mode of transport, cheapest route or mode of transport, is more preferred, right? We'll write one line about it, like continental routes offer challenges, right? Offer challenges. For example, what are the challenges? Geography offers a challenge, like there are mountains, there are plateaus, there are deserts, there are valleys which are difficult to cross. So it's better that the water transport is more swift, it's more preferred, right? Now, to connect these or to avoid continental routes or continental hurdles, straits play a significant role. These are significant as they provide a very important connectivity or passage between two larger water bodies. So this is the first point that we can write, that continental routes, etc., yes, they are important, but they all offer resistance to the movement, whereas water transport, being the cheapest mode of transport, offers a easy escape or easy option. But then straits play an important role because they help us to avoid. Now here we can take an example. For example, the Strait of Malacca, which is one of the busiest straits of the world. Now, why Strait of Malacca is important? Because in a globalized world like east and west trade, Strait of Malacca provides a very important connectivity. You should know where is Strait of Malacca, right? That Malaya Peninsula and Sumatra, there's a Strait of Malacca that provides Andaman Sea, and it connects the Java Sea, and it plays a significant role. Now, Strait of Malacca accounts for about 40% of world trade. Then apart from that, you can also take an example, that Strait of Hormuz, right? You can see Iran on one side, they largely control the Strait of Hormuz. Strait of Hormuz is accountable for 1/3 of liquefied natural gas and about 1/6 of oil transport. So by giving some of these information, you can make it clear that how important are these straits. Otherwise, the land route would have been difficult, one. Number two, if you have to bypass the land, then it would have been a longer route, longer journey. So this is one of the aspect that we can write. Then besides that, right, besides this Strait of Hormuz and route trade, coming to the isthmus, one of the major isthmus, in fact two isthmus that we have, Panama and Suez. Right, Panama Canal, we constructed Panama Canal connecting Atlantic Ocean and Pacific Ocean, therefore a huge saving on the transport, huge saving on the time as well. Besides that, isthmus provide site for ports, right, construction of ports. And if we dig canals through these isthmus, like Suez Canal is an example, and we know the Suez Canal after 1869 played a very significant role, and it provides transport or passage to around 12% of world trade. That shows how important are straits and isthmus. They provide the port facility, they provide the passage. If we dig canals through it, Panama Canal is an example to that, and that will play a very significant role in the overall world trade, because approximately 90% of the world trade is on sea, and that requires an easy passage provided by straits, and at times isthmus, either they provide the port facility, or Port Said is an example, Port Tawfiq is an example, or if we dig canals through them, that will provide us an facility of reducing the travel. Next, troposphere is very significant atmospheric layer which determines weather processes. So first of all, we should understand what is a weather process. Right? Weather process means the average condition, the physical state of atmosphere, right? Physical state of atmosphere at any given instance. Physical state of atmosphere. Now, this physical state of atmosphere is determined by temperature, pressure, humidity. And if you look at the weather report, what do we get in the weather report? Temperature, humidity, pressure, and so on. What is the physical state of the surrounding, what is the physical state of the environment is what is called as a weather condition. One of the major determinant of the weather is temperature, humidity, atmospheric pressure. All that is an important aspect. Now, coming to next point, coming up to take up this question, troposphere. The question is also, next part is troposphere. We know that troposphere is also called as zone of mixing. Zone of mixing. Why is it called a zone of mixing? Because all weather phenomenon takes place or occur in troposphere. What are weather phenomena? Rainfall, wind, cyclones, all the cloud formation, they are confined to this boundary called as troposphere, therefore called as zone of mixing. So, for all weather phenomena, what is the primary determinant? Temperature. What is the primary determinant? Moisture. What is the requirement? Dust particles. All these are present in troposphere. As we keep rising up, the rarefication of air takes place, the concentration of gases keep on decreasing. So we consider this that 99% of atmosphere, 99% of atmosphere is confined within troposphere. In fact, 90% of atmosphere remains confined up to the height of 6.5 kilometers. That is the atmospheric concentration. Now let's start framing this and understand this phenomena. Now, most of the carbon dioxide, which is an important gas for the greenhouse effect, one of the major gases for greenhouse effect, remain confined to troposphere. It plays an important role in warming of the atmosphere. Warming of atmosphere means the temperature keeps increasing because of the greenhouse effect. So that is how the temperature is affected. Then for cloud formation, what is required? Humidity. Water vapors are denser, so they remain confined to the lower part of atmosphere. What is also required are the dust particles. They remain confined in the lower part of the atmosphere. So cloud formation also takes place in troposphere. So this is how we can frame this. Besides that, condensation also takes place in troposphere. Right? The temperature decrease, etc., can take place within the troposphere, because more or less temperature can decrease in the upper part of troposphere as well. Right? In the ozone, it increases and then it decreases in the mesosphere. But most of the fluctuations of temperature would be observed in the troposphere itself. So most of the weather phenomena, because they are linked to carbon dioxide concentration, water vapors, dust particles, they remain within troposphere. Now, this is how we can take this question. It's a very easy question, nothing much to discuss as such. So we can easily maintain or manage with this question, right? You should be able to relate all these topics. Coming to the next question. So elucidate the relationship between globalization, new technology in a world of scarce resources. Now this is a relatively tough question where you'll have to frame your answer. It's not a straightforward answer question unlike the questions that we have discussed so far, this would require a bit of framing, right? So I'll just help you to frame this question and what is actually meant by this. Now, we can always think of this line that in a world of scarce resources, globalization, right? Scarce resources, globalization without new technology is not sustainable. Is not sustainable. We require new technology to fight against the scarcity of resources, to find new options for scarcity of resources. Now, how does globalization play an important role? Let's see. Countries which are, how can we make for the scarcity of resources? It is mainly, the question has been asked in context to India. Now, the countries which are scarce in resources can fulfill their resources in two ways. One is improving efficiency and increasing, or therefore increasing the resource base. Increasing the resource base. When I say resource base, what does it mean? Now, suppose if India is able to convert thorium into uranium-233 in the second stage of nuclear energy policy and successfully isolate that, then we'll reach to the third nuclear energy policy. There will be a resource base will increase. So countries which are having lesser resources like India, the one way is improving the efficiency and increasing the resource base. Second way is to bring or import resources from other countries. That is how we can fulfill the resource base. Either we improve our technology, improve the efficiency, or we import the resources from other countries, like we are importing oil and gas. We are also having the civil nuclear cooperation. Now, this part of this point, that is improvement in the efficiency of resources and so on, requires technology, right? Technological innovations like artificial intelligence, improving on the biofuel policy and so on. Technology is required. Technology, how will globalization help in this? Globalization helps in technology diffusion. It helps in innovation also. It helps mainly in the technology diffusion. So technology transfer to the developing countries, technology transfer to the other countries, that helps in bringing up technology to a higher level. Another example of India's biofuel policy, or otherwise biofuel policy, where we start blending the diesel with alcohol, ethyl alcohol, to increase its efficiency. If we work together to enhance or speed up the process of conversion of thorium into uranium-233 with other countries, then it can help us to get the technology faster. Globalization would also be required in technological diffusion and technological advancement. Whereas import of resources from other countries also requires globalization. It is possible in a globalized world where tariff rates are reduced, or in other words, less obstacles, right? So reduce tariff rates, decrease the tax barriers, so less obstacles and less tax barriers. Now this would make countries to exchange resources, right? And only then it is possible. And the best example for this is civil nuclear cooperation, because India is a huge market, right? With this huge market, India is able to negotiate with the countries like USA and also get the this fuel that is required for nuclear programs. We are also working on to get more oil or cheaper options of oil and natural gas from other countries, possible only in a globalized world. So on one side, we require new technology, technological diffusion. On the other side, we require more connectivity to the other countries of the world, like merging markets, bringing up equal tariff norms, or reducing the tariff barriers. This will help us to increase the resource base of the country. So now this question can be handled or can be answered if we bring these two aspects. One is that two ways of improving the country resource base, and both are connected to globalization. Now these are questions which were asked in geography and all, right? So you should understand that kind of questions that were asked this year are very, very simple, not very complicated. And if you follow up the kind of questions that were asked in the previous years, I have already started with earlier discussion on this. we started with this point that 115 marks were asked this year in geography. It's a very good percentage of marks, and it's not only advantageous for geography optional students, otherwise also people who are like who study general studies like geography from the general studies point of view can also handle the questions. The level of toughness was relatively less according to me, except 1 or 2 questions. Let's move on to next discussion on the questions that were asked in disaster management. We have 2 questions on disaster management this year, right? 2 questions this year. There were 2 questions in 2021, 1 question in 2020, 2 questions in 2019, and 1 each in 2018 and 17. So more or less the question that are asked in disaster management are saying 1 or 2 questions that we get in paper 3. So this year 2 questions. Let's see. Okay, now explain the mechanism of occurrence of cloudburst in context of Indian subcontinent. Discuss 2 recent examples. Okay, let's see. Mechanism of cloudburst. See, first, if you go by the definition of the cloudburst, right, it is a very simple definition of cloudburst. As per the definition, it says sudden or rapid fall of moisture from clouds. That's how cloudburst is defined. Quantitatively, it is defined if the rainfall is 1000 millimeters 4 hours, right? That's the rate at which the rainfall occurs in a area of about 20 to 30 kilometers of area. Brief idea about what is cloudburst. Now, what is important in mechanism here? Understand that clouds have huge amount of moisture, especially those clouds which result in cloudburst. Technically, these cloudbursts are also mainly caused by cumulonimbus clouds, the dark dense clouds containing huge amount of moisture. The condensation process converts vapors into water droplets along with the condensation nuclei, that is dust particle. Dust particle acts as the condensation nuclei. Condensation nuclei acted as by dust particles. Now, the area, or rather the size of this dust particle, water droplets keeps on increasing because there is a force of cohesion between the water droplets. So, force of cohesion keeps on occurring, and that brings the 2 particles together. In fact, in the cloudburst there are 2 forces. In the clouds there are 2 forces which act. One is the electrostatic forces between charged particles, and the force of cohesion between water droplets. What does this charged particle do? It brings the particles together, it brings the water droplets together. And what does this cohesion force do? It causes the merger of 2 droplets to form a bigger water droplet. This process is called as collision coalescence. Collision coalescence. When 2 droplets get closer and get transformed into a bigger droplet, called as collision coalescence. Now, if the rainfall occurs at this stage, it may not lead to the cloudburst, but what has happened recently, or what is happening now, the temperature is very high and it produces a strong convection, right? It produces a strong convection. Convectional current in atmosphere are responsible for keeping water droplets in air or in clouds. That provides that kind of upward buoyancy, upward force for droplets to remain in clouds itself. So the clouds are merging and becoming bigger, but the upward movement of air, that convective current is not allowing the water to fall. Now this speeds up the collision coalescence process. Increased collision coalescence process makes the water droplet even bigger, leading to a very massive rainfall called as cloud burst. So to understand the mechanism of cloud burst, you should understand first, or you should write about, number one, the collision coalescence process. Collision coalescence process, that is because of force of cohesion and the force between, electrostatic force between charged particles. Second point, you should understand that convectional forces or convectional current of warm air keeps it floating, keeps water droplets floating. Right now, this floating process speeds up or accelerates collision coalescence process and culminates into cloud burst. As the question demands, two examples. One was a massive cloud burst that took place in Chamoli in Uttarakhand. There was in fact so many cloud bursts that have taken place. Karnataka, there was one. Chamoli, there was one. There was one more very devastating cloud burst in Jammu and Kashmir in Dachin area of this district, Kishtwar in Jammu and Kashmir, where 26 people were reported to die and a lot of people were affected. They were homeless because a massive cloud burst took place and it splashed into the local stream, causing a massive damage in that area. So these are two examples. Besides that, we have so many examples, like Himachal Pradesh, there were few cloud bursts. Northeast, there were few cloud bursts. Tripura, there were few cloud bursts. So there are few examples. So my suggestion to those who will be taking exam next year, that you should always take a note of all the types of disaster like earthquake, volcanic eruptions, tsunamis if they occur, or cloud bursts, floods, droughts. A case study of all that should be prepared. Okay, now let's go to the next question. That is, explain the causes and effects of coastal erosion in India. Now, this was one of the most predicted question this year, because lots is being talked about the coastal erosion in India. Like Odisha is losing huge amount of land, like almost 60% of the coast of Odisha has experienced erosion. There has been erosion in Kerala, there has been erosion in Tamil Nadu. All coasts have experienced erosion. So first of all, we'll straight away write about the coastal erosion, right? Defining soil erosion as the removal of top layer more than the natural limit, that's called as erosion, soil erosion. Now, so far as the coastal erosion is concerned, why is coastal erosion so prominent? First is cyclones, frequent cyclones leading to a massive rainfall that causes sheet erosion in the region. Second is Bay of Bengal region, especially eastern coast of India, has more rough waters rough waters, and at times tides and waves also result in higher rainfall. Third, because erosion is not only by the erosive agent, it is also about the erodibility. Like some soils erode faster than other soils. Like for example, the clay soil erodes much faster. Clay soil of coastal regions, they receive, rather they erode much faster, the erodibility is much higher in clay soils. Then also the agricultural practices in the coastal areas are one of the reasons for higher water erosion, or higher soil erosion in the coastal regions. Now, Odisha, 60% of that is experiencing, has been lost. 40% is there in Malabar coast. There is equal amount of erosion there in the eastern coast, Coromandel coast of India. So all the coastal areas, eastern as well as western coastal areas, do experience erosional features or erosional process. Eastern coast, however, has experienced more erosion in comparison to the western region, because they have these conditions are suitable there in eastern coast more than the western coast. Then the next part of the question demands about the coastal management techniques, like creating embankments, barriers. There are some techniques for that. Also planting more trees, planting more trees, like mangrove can be very important for the coastal ecosystem and can reduce soil erosion to a great extent. Also creating these barriers for cyclones and tsunamis, and also for sea waves, can help us to reduce soil erosion in coastal areas. Now, these are some of the questions that have been asked, and if you see the disaster management questions, 2 questions, but important one in paper 3. So they are worth 25 marks as it was there in the last year. Right. So from our side, on behalf of Drishti and the team, we wish you a good luck for those people who have taken exams this year, and we wish you to see and meet all of you, those who get through in our interview programs, and those who are taking a mains next year or one more year later. Keep studying. This is just one of the question paper that UPSC has asked. There will be another question paper, but more or less on the same pattern. So work hard. We'll see you next time. Thank you.